They stripped her of everything but her name. Martha Hale stood in chains at high noon, not for killing a man, but for failing to keep him alive. The town square blazed with summer heat and sharper still, with judgment. Women whispered about her body. Men about her shame. Children stared, learning cruelty from their elders. But what they didn't see was the woman inside those restraints, the one who'd already survived worse than their scorn. This is the story of a woman who refused to break, and the broken family who taught her what it meant to be chosen. If you stay until the end, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Martha's story travels. The iron was hot enough to smell. Martha Hale felt it first against her wrists, the metal restraints they'd locked around her before marching her through Main Street like a common criminal. The crowd had already gathered by the time Sheriff Porter's men brought her to the square, their faces a mixture of fascination and disgust, the kind of expression people wear when they've been given permission to hate. High noon in Coldwater, Montana wasn't a time for mercy. The sun hammered down on the wooden platform they'd erected specifically for this, not a gallows, nothing so dramatic, just a raised stage where shame could be performed for maximum visibility. Martha's legs ached from standing. But she refused to shift her weight, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her uncomfortable. She was a large woman, broad-shouldered, full-bodied, the kind of physical presence that took up space unapologetically. Or at least, it had been unapologetic once. Before Richard died. Before the whispers started, Martha Hale. Sheriff Porter's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade through butter. He stood to her left, his badge catching the sunlight, his face arranged in an expression of practiced solemnity that didn't quite reach his eyes. You stand accused before this community of gross negligence resulting in the untimely death of your husband, Richard Hale. And of conduct unbecoming a Christian woman. The charges were absurd. Richard had died of pneumonia, caught during a late winter when the medicine couldn't reach them in time. But facts didn't matter in Coldwater. What mattered was narrative, and the narrative the town had constructed was far more satisfying than the truth. A woman who looked like Martha, who took up space, who didn't shrink herself, who had the audacity to eat when she was hungry and speak when she had something to say, must have somehow failed her husband. Must have weakened him with her own excess. Must have driven him to his death through some fundamental moral failing that showed itself in the very flesh of her body. The defendant will address the charges, Porter continued, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Not a threat. Just a reminder. Martha lifted her chin. Her dark hair had been pulled back severely, exposing the full planes of her face, high cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that hadn't learned to look away. I have nothing to address. My husband died of illness. I nursed him until his last breath. There is no crime in that. A woman in the front row, Mrs. Whitmore, the pastor's wife, made a sound of disgust. Shameless, she hissed, loud enough to be heard. Even now, she shows no remorse. Remorse for what? Martha's voice carried across the square, and she saw several people flinch at the directness of it. For being unable to cure a disease. For surviving when he didn't, for failing in your duties as a wife, Porter interjected smoothly. Multiple witnesses have testified to your indulgences. Your excessive consumption. Your refusal to maintain a proper Christian household. The crowd murmured agreement. Martha felt the heat of their judgment like a physical thing, pressing against her skin. She wanted to laugh. Excessive consumption. In a house where she'd rationed every meal, stretched every dollar, made soup from bones and bread from flour mixed with sawdust when times were lean. But she'd never been thin. Her body had never cooperated with the town's definition of virtue. Never transformed suffering into the kind of fragile beauty they could pity and control. I kept my house, Martha said quietly. I kept my husband fed and warm until the day he died. If that's failure, then I'll own it. Porter's eyes narrowed. He'd expected tears by now, or anger, or some kind of emotional display he could use against her. Martha's calm was an insult to the entire proceeding. The punishment, he announced, turning to address the crowd, is forfeiture of property and exile from Coldwater. Effective immediately. Mrs. Hale will have until sundown to remove herself from town limits, exile. The word hung in the air like smoke. In 1887, in the Montana Territory, exile meant death, or close enough. A woman alone, with no resources, no protection, no destination. The wilderness would finish what the town had started. Martha felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. Something harder than fear. Something that felt almost like freedom. Understood, she said. Porter looked disappointed. He'd wanted her to beg. They all had. The crowd shifted restlessly, denied their climax, but then a voice from the middle of the assembly called out, "What about decency? We have children here. Should they have to look at that?" The speaker gestured vaguely at Martha's body, as if the mere fact of her physical existence was obscene. The crowd picked up the thread eagerly. Yes, the children. Think of the children. Exposing them to such moral decay. Such visible evidence of sin. Porter raised his hand for silence, but his smile suggested he was pleased with the direction this was taking. Mrs. Hale will kneel, he declared. She will kneel and acknowledge her failings before this community. For the sake of the children watching, she will demonstrate humility. The restraints on Martha's wrists were connected to a chain anchored to the platform. If she knelt, Porter could lock that chain in place, holding her there for however long he deemed appropriate. Hours, if he wanted. In the full sun. For the entertainment and edification of Coldwater's citizens. Martha looked at the sheriff. Then at the crowd. Then at the packed earth of the town square beneath her feet. She knelt, not because she agreed with a single word they'd said. Not because she felt shame or remorse or any of the emotions they wanted from her. But because she'd learned, in her 32 years of life, that sometimes the fastest way through hell was straight down the middle. She knelt, and she kept her spine straight, and she looked Porter directly in the eye as he secured the chain. 3 hours, he announced. For reflection and prayer, the crowd began to disperse, their civic duty fulfilled. Some lingered, settling into the shade with their children, pointing and whispering. Teaching the next generation how to other. How to exclude. How to punish difference. Martha closed her eyes against the sun and retreated inward. She thought about Richard, not the frail, fever-racked man who'd died in their bed, but the young carpenter who'd courted her with quiet determination, who'd said her laugh was like music, who traced the curve of her hip with reverent fingers and whispered that she was perfect exactly as she was. He'd been a good man. A weak man, in some ways, too willing to bend to the town's expectations, too afraid of standing out, but good. She'd loved him. Mourned him. And now she was being punished for his death by people who'd never once visited when he was sick. Never brought food or medicine or even kind words. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so brutal. An hour passed. Then too, Martha's knees screamed against the rough wood. Sweat ran down her spine, soaked into the high collar of her black mourning dress. Her throat was dry as sand, but she didn't break. She'd survived worse than this. Survived a childhood in a boarding house where being large meant being a target. Survived hunger and cold and the kind of loneliness that hollowed you out from the inside. This was just theater. Ugly, vicious theater, but theater nonetheless, and theater always ended. What Martha couldn't know, kneeling there in the merciless sun, was that she was being watched by someone who recognized the quality of her silence. Caleb Ross stood at the far edge of the square, half hidden in the shadow of the general store. He'd come to town for supplies, not spectacle, but the crowd had drawn him like a sickness draws flies. He'd seen public shamings before. Hell, he'd participated in them, back when he'd been younger and stupider and thought that conformity could protect him from grief. But this felt different. Meaner. More personal. The woman on the platform, Martha Hale, he'd heard them call her, wasn't crying. Wasn't begging. She knelt like a queen in exile, dignified even in degradation. Caleb found that interesting. He was 40 years old, a widower with twin daughters, and he'd learned to recognize strength in unexpected places. His wife Sarah had been strong enough to survive childbirth in a snowstorm, strong enough to nurse 2 premature infants through their first brutal winter, strong enough to keep smiling even when exhaustion wore her down to nothing. And then one day, she wasn't strong enough anymore. Fever took her fast, left him with 2 4-year-old girls and a silence so complete it felt like drowning. That was 4 years ago. Since then, Caleb had focused everything on survival. On keeping Lily and May fed, clothed, safe. On teaching them to be careful, to be quiet, to not draw attention. To survive in a world that didn't make space for motherless girls and overwhelmed fathers, he'd succeeded. Mostly. The girls were healthy. Growing. Learning, but they weren't happy. Caleb saw it in the way they watched other families, the way they noticed mothers braiding daughters' hair, the way they went silent when other children talked about being tucked in at night. They were growing up competent but cold, learning to expect nothing soft from the world, and he didn't know how to fix it. Now, watching Martha Hale absorb the town's cruelty without flinching, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Recognition, maybe. Or possibility. When the 3 hours finally ended and Porter unlocked the chain, Martha rose slowly. Her legs trembled but held. She didn't rub her wrists or show any sign of pain. She simply turned and walked off the platform. The crowd watched her go, unsatisfied. She hadn't given them catharsis. Hadn't confirmed their righteousness. She just endured. Caleb waited until she was halfway down Main Street before he followed, keeping his distance. He told himself he just wanted to make sure she made it out of town safely. That it was basic human decency, but the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that he recognized something in Martha Hale's stubborn survival, something he'd spent 4 years trying to suppress in himself, the dangerous, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to live instead of just survive. Martha collected what little she could carry from the house that had been hers and Richard's. The town had already stripped it of anything valuable, claiming debts that had never existed. She was left with a change of clothes, a worn Bible she didn't particularly want but knew might be useful, and a small pouch of seeds from her kitchen garden. It wasn't much. But it was more than nothing. She was tying her bundle when she heard the knock. For a moment, hope flared stupidly in her chest, someone coming to apologize, to say this had all been a terrible mistake. But when she opened the door, she found only Caleb Ross, his hat in his hands, his expression carefully neutral. "Ma'am," he said. "I wonder if I might have a word." Martha studied him. She'd seen him around town, quiet man, kept to himself, raising 2 girls alone after his wife died. People respected him because he didn't cause trouble, didn't ask for help, didn't take up space he wasn't entitled to. The opposite of Martha. In other words, "You've got about 10 minutes before I need to leave," she said. "Make it quick," Caleb nodded. "I have a proposition. My homestead is 15 miles north of here, just outside town limits. I need help. The girls they need things I can't give them. And you need somewhere to go." Martha's eyes narrowed. "You're offering me charity, I'm offering you work." Caleb corrected. "Room and board in exchange for domestic management. Cooking, cleaning, teaching the girls their letters. It's not charity if you're working for it." "Why?" The question came out harder than she'd intended. "Why would you risk your standing in this town for someone like me?" Caleb met her gaze steadily. "Because I watched what they did to you today. And I decided I don't much care about standing with people like that." Something in Martha's chest loosened, just a fraction. "I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not," she warned. "I'm not going to make myself smaller to make you comfortable. I'm not going to apologize for taking up space." "Good," Caleb said simply. My girls have seen enough of women who apologize for existing. Maybe it's time they saw a different example. Martha looked at this strange, quiet man standing in her doorway, offering her exactly what she needed when she'd expected nothing but cruelty. She should have been suspicious. Should have questioned his motives. Should have protected herself against disappointment. Instead, she heard herself say, "When do we leave?" Caleb's shoulders dropped, as if he'd been holding tension he hadn't realized was there. "Now, if you're ready." "I've got a wagon outside." Martha picked up her bundle. Walked through the house one last time, saying goodbye to the life she tried to build here. The life the town had burned down around her, and then she followed Caleb Ross into whatever came next. The wagon rattled over frozen earth as they left Coldwater behind. Martha sat rigid beside Caleb, her bundle clutched in her lap, watching the town shrink into the distance until it was nothing but a smudge of smoke against the pale winter sky. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either, more like the quiet between two people who'd both learned that words could be weapons and chose to keep their arsenals holstered. The twins sat in the back of the wagon, identical dark-haired girls with their father's serious eyes. They watched Martha with the kind of frank, unblinking assessment that only children could manage. Not cruel, just curious. Measuring her against some internal standard Martha couldn't begin to guess at. After an hour, the smaller one, or maybe just the one sitting on the left, spoke up. "Are you going to be our new mother, Lily?" Caleb said sharply, his first word since they'd left town. "That's not, it's all right," Martha interrupted. She turned in her seat to look at the girls properly. They were maybe 7 or 8 years old, dressed in clean but patched clothing, their hair braided with the kind of practical efficiency that spoke of a father doing his best. "No," she told Lily. "I'm not going to be your mother. Your mother was a specific person who loved you. I can't replace her and I won't try." The other twin, May, Martha guessed, tilted her head. "Then what are you going to be?" It was a fair question. Martha considered it carefully. "I'm going to be someone who lives in your house and helps your father keep things running. Someone who'll teach you things if you want to learn them. Someone who'll be honest with you, even when the truth isn't pretty. Beyond that?" She shrugged. "We'll have to figure it out as we go." May nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied her. Lily just kept staring, her gaze sharp enough to cut. "Papa says you got in trouble in town," Lily said. "He says people were mean to you." "Lily," Caleb started again, but Martha waved him off. "Your papa's right. People were mean to me. They said things that weren't true and punished me for something I didn't do." "Why?" May asked. "Because I'm different from what they think a woman should be. And different scares people. Makes them angry." Lily leaned forward, her small face intense. "Papa says different isn't bad. He says different just means you have to be careful." Martha felt something twist in her chest. She looked at Caleb, whose jaw was tight, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Your papa's smart," she said quietly. "Different isn't bad. But yes, you do have to be careful. Are you careful?" May wanted to know. Martha thought about the platform, the chains, the 3 hours in the sun. Thought about kneeling but refusing to break. "I'm learning to be," she said. The girls seemed to accept this. They settled back into the wagon bed, whispering to each other in a language that was part words, part gestures, the private communication of twins. Martha turned forward again, feeling Caleb's tension like heat radiating from a stove. "You don't have to answer their questions," he said. "They're too curious for their own good sometimes. They're children. Curious is what they should be." Martha paused. "You told them people were mean to me, didn't see the point in lying. They're going to hear about it eventually, might as well hear it from me first." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "I didn't tell them the details. Just that the town treated you unfairly, that's one word for it. I've got other words. Most of them aren't fit for present company. Martha felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Almost a smile. I appreciate that. They rode in silence for another mile. Then Caleb said, the house isn't much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, root cellar. I've been meaning to add on but never found the time. You'll have your own room, the girls share the other one and I sleep in the loft above the main room. There's privacy enough, if that's what you're worried about. I wasn't worried. Well. Good. He cleared his throat. The work's real. I'm not inventing tasks to make you feel useful. The garden's mostly dead because I don't know enough about plants to keep anything alive except potatoes. The house is clean but not like Sarah used to keep it. And the girls need teaching beyond what I can give them. I can manage numbers and basic reading, but anything beyond that. He trailed off, frustrated. I can teach, Martha said. I went to school through 8th grade. That's more than most girls get, Caleb nodded. The pay's not much. I can't offer wages, not really. But you'll have food, shelter, safety. And when you're ready to move on, I'll help you get wherever you need to go, when you're ready to move on. The words hung between them, a reminder that this was temporary. An arrangement born of necessity, not choice. Martha told herself that was fine. Temporary was safer than permanent. Temporary couldn't hurt you as badly when it ended, that's fair, she said. The homestead appeared as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, a rough cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that had seen better days, and what might have once been a decent garden plot now choked with dead weeds and old snow. It wasn't impressive. But it wasn't Coldwater either, and right now that counted for more than Martha wanted to admit. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hand brief and impersonal on her elbow. The girls tumbled out, suddenly energized now that they were home, racing toward the cabin with shouts about who would get the good chair by the fire. They've got more life in them here, Martha observed. Town makes them nervous, Caleb admitted. Too many people watching, judging. Out here they can just be children. He grabbed her bundle and his supply sacks. Come on. I'll show you around before dark. The inside of the cabin was exactly what he described, functional but joyless. Clean floors, bare walls, furniture that served its purpose without decoration or comfort. It reminded Martha of a body that had survived injury but never quite healed. Everything worked, but nothing felt whole. The girls' bedroom was small but organized, 2 narrow beds with matching quilts, a trunk between them for their clothes. The loft where Caleb slept was barely visible, just a glimpse of a thin mattress and wool blanket. And her room, the room that would be hers, was completely empty except for a bed frame and a small window facing east. I can bring in a table if you want, Caleb offered. Or a chair. There's not much stored away, but what there is, you're welcome to. Martha set her bundle on the bare mattress. This is fine. More than fine. He shifted uncomfortably. I know it's not, it's a room of my own with a door that closes. After today, that's luxury. She turned to face him directly. Thank you. For this. For all of it. I know you're taking a risk. Caleb's expression was hard to read in the fading light. Maybe. But I've been thinking lately that the bigger risk might be playing it safe. Teaching my daughters to be small and quiet and invisible because that's how you survive. He paused. I watched you today, in that square. You weren't small. You weren't quiet. And you survived anyway. Maybe that's worth the risk. Before Martha could respond, Lily's voice rang out from the main room. Papa. I'm hungry, there's your cue, Martha said. What do you usually feed them? Caleb looked sheepish. Beans, mostly. Some salt pork if we've got it. Bread when I remember to bake it. Which is how often, not often enough, according to May. Martha felt something shift inside her, a familiar stirring she'd thought Coldwater had beaten out of her. Purpose. Direction. The simple satisfaction of knowing exactly what needed to be done. "Show me your kitchen," she said. "Let's see what we're working with." The kitchen area was part of the main room, dominated by a large stone hearth and a work table that had been scrubbed so many times the wood was pale and smooth. The supplies Caleb had bought in town were sparse: flour, salt, a little sugar, dried beans, some coffee. Not much to work with, but Martha had made meals from less. She tied on an apron she found hanging by the hearth and set to work. The girls watched from their spot by the fire, curiosity overcoming shyness. Caleb hovered near the table, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. "You can light me better lanterns," Martha told him. "And maybe see about bringing in water from the well. I'll need enough to soak these beans for tomorrow. We're not eating them tonight, not unless you want to be up all night with a stomachache. Quick cooked beans are fine in an emergency, but if we have time to do it right, we should." She was already measuring flour, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Tonight we'll have fry bread and gravy. It's not fancy, but it'll fill you up." Caleb brought in water while Martha worked. The girls crept closer, drawn by the competent way she moved around the kitchen, the way she seemed to know exactly where everything should be even though she'd never been in this room before. "Can we help?" May asked quietly. Martha glanced at her. "Can you measure?" "I think so." "Then you can help me with the gravy. Your sister can watch the bread so it doesn't burn." She handed May a wooden spoon. "See this pot? When it starts to bubble, you stir it exactly 3 times around the edge. No more, no less. Can you do that?" May nodded seriously, accepting the responsibility like a sacred trust. Lily took up position by the fire, watching the flat bread cook on the hot stone with fierce concentration. And just like that, the silent kitchen came alive. They ate together at the rough table, the 4 of them crowded around plates that Martha had heaped with more food than they were probably used to. The girls devoured everything, then asked shyly if there might be seconds. Caleb ate more slowly, his eyes on Martha as she served his daughters, as she answered their endless questions about cooking and measurements and why flour did what it did when you mixed it with water. After dinner, Martha shooed the girls toward bed despite their protests. "Tomorrow's soon enough to start lessons," she told them. "Tonight you need sleep, will you tuck us in?" Lily asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. As if she'd revealed too much, Martha's throat tightened. "If you want me to," both girls nodded. She followed them to their small room, feeling Caleb's gaze on her back. The girls climbed into their respective beds, and Martha pulled the quilts up to their chins, exactly the way her own mother had done a lifetime ago. "Do you know any stories?" May whispered, "Plenty. But they'll keep until tomorrow. Right now you need to sleep, our mama used to sing," Lily said. "Papa doesn't know the words anymore." Martha's heart cracked a little. "Then maybe we'll learn some new songs together. Would that be all right?" The girls considered this. Finally, Lily nodded. "I think Mama would like that. She always said there was more than one way to do things right." "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was the best," May said fiercely. "Then I'll do my best to honor her memory," Martha promised. "By being honest with you, and kind, and by never trying to pretend I'm something I'm not." "Deal, deal," both girls chorused. Martha left them to sleep and found Caleb still at the table, staring into his coffee cup like it held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. "They like you," he said without looking up. "They're starved for female attention. Don't mistake desperation for affection, that's harsh, that's honest." Martha sat down across from him. "They're good girls, Caleb. You've done well with them. But they need more than you can give them alone." "That's not a criticism, it's just fact." Caleb finally met her eyes. "I know. I've known it for a while now. I just didn't know what to do about it." He paused. "Sheriff Porter came to see me last month. Said he had concerns about my ability to raise daughters properly. Said maybe they'd be better off with a proper family, married couple, church-going folks who could teach them to be ladies." Martha went still. He threatened to take them, not in so many words. But the implication was clear enough. Caleb's jaw tightened. I told him to get off my land. But he'll be back. Men like Porter always come back. Men like Porter came for me today, Martha said quietly. They'll use any excuse to control people who don't fit their narrow view of how the world should work. You're a widower raising girls alone. I'm a woman who won't perform grief the way they expect. We're both problems that need solving, in their eyes, so what do? We solve ourselves first. We build something here that's strong enough to withstand whatever Porter throws at us. Martha leaned forward. But I need you to understand something. I'm not going to make myself smaller to appease him. I'm not going to pretend to be meek or broken or grateful for your charity. If you need that from me, if you need someone who'll help your standing in town, then you brought the wrong woman home. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, for years ago, my wife died because we couldn't get help in time. The neighbors who might have helped didn't, because we'd been too quiet, too invisible. We hadn't made the right friends or joined the right committees. We just existed. And when we needed people, we were alone. His voice roughened. I won't make that mistake again. I won't teach my daughters that survival means making yourself invisible, even if it costs you. Even then, Martha studied him in the lamplight, this quiet, serious man who'd offered her sanctuary when the whole town had turned its back. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense. His face was too weathered, too lined with worry. But there was something solid about him. Something that didn't bend just because the wind changed direction. All right then, she said. We'll face whatever comes. Together, the word hung between them, together, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to examine. Caleb stood abruptly. I should check on the horses. Make sure everything's settled for the night, and I should clean up from dinner. They moved around each other carefully, two people navigating new territory without a map. Martha washed dishes in the basin while Caleb disappeared into the cold night. When he came back, she was hanging the wet cloth to dry by the fire. Martha, he said, and something in his tone made her turn. What you said to the girls earlier. About being honest even when the truth isn't pretty, what about it? Does that apply to me too? She met his gaze steadily. Always, he nodded slowly. Then I'll be honest with you. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know if this arrangement will work or if I've just complicated both our lives. I don't know if I'm helping you or using you to fix my own failures. And I don't know what happens when Porter comes knocking again, because he will. I don't know those things either, Martha admitted. But I know I'd rather face uncertainty here than certain death out there. So for now. That's enough, for now, Caleb echoed. He climbed up to his loft, and Martha retreated to her empty room. She lay on the bare mattress, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new place, the wind against the cabin walls, the settling of timber, the soft breathing of the twins in the next room. For the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid, exhausted, yes. Uncertain, absolutely. But not afraid, and that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was a start. Martha woke to the sound of small feet on wooden floors and whispered arguments about who got to wake her up first. She smiled into her pillow before opening her eyes, savoring the strange novelty of being wanted. Even if only by two curious children who saw her as an interesting disruption to their routine. We know you're awake, Lily announced from the doorway. Your breathing changed. Martha rolled over to find both twins watching her with identical expressions of determination. Early morning light slanted through the small window, turning their dark hair copper at the edges. You're observant, she said. Papa says observant keeps you alive, May offered. He says people who don't pay attention miss important things. Your papa's right about a lot of things. Martha sat up, running her fingers through her hair, aware of how she must look, rumpled, unmade, taking up more than her fair share of the narrow bed. But the girls didn't seem to notice or care. They were too busy studying her with the frank interest of scientists examining a fascinating specimen. "Are you going to teach us today?" Lily asked. "Papa said you might, after breakfast and chores." "Yes." "What do you already know?" "Letters," May said. "And numbers up to 100. And how to read a little bit, but only easy words. We know about plants too," Lily added quickly, as if worried Martha might think them ignorant. "Papa taught us which ones are safe to eat in the woods and which ones will make you sick. That's practical knowledge. The best kind." Martha stood, smoothing down her dress. "How about you teach me something this morning? Show me around the property. Help me understand what's growing here and what's been neglected." The girls' faces lit up. They grabbed her hands, one on each side, and pulled her toward the main room where Caleb was already up, coaxing the fire back to life. He looked up as they entered, and something crossed his face too quickly for Martha to name. Surprise, maybe, at seeing his daughters so comfortable with someone new. Or concern that they were getting attached too fast. "They're kidnapping me," Martha said. "Apparently I need a tour. They're thorough guides," Caleb replied, his voice still rough with sleep. "Fair warning, they'll talk your ear off about every rock and tree." "Good. I like people who pay attention to their world." The girls dragged her outside into the sharp morning air. The sun was just clearing the eastern mountains, painting everything gold and rose. Martha could see the full scope of the property now, maybe 40 acres of cleared land, with forest pressing in on 3 sides. The garden plot she'd glimpsed yesterday was even more depressing in full light, a tangle of dead vegetation and frozen earth that spoke of months of neglect. "That used to be beautiful," May said quietly, following Martha's gaze. "Mama had flowers and vegetables all mixed together. She said they helped each other grow." "Companion planting," Martha murmured. "Smart woman. Papa tried to keep it going after she died. But he didn't know what to do. Things just sort of died." Lily kicked at a clod of frozen dirt. It made him sad, so he stopped trying. Martha knelt down, ignoring the cold seeping through her skirt, and dug her fingers into the soil. Still good earth underneath all that death. Still potential waiting to be unlocked. "Come spring, we'll bring it back," she said. "If that's something you'd want to do, really." May's voice was small, hopeful. "Really. But it'll be work. Real work, not the pretend kind. Your backs will ache and your hands will blister and some days you'll hate me for making you eat in the hot sun." "We don't mind work," Lily said firmly. "We're not afraid of hard things." "I can see that." Martha stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Show me the rest." They walked the property together, the girls pointing out the barn where 3 horses and a milk cow lived, the chicken coop that Caleb had built but never quite finished, the root cellar dug into the hillside where they stored potatoes and turnips and not much else. They showed her the creek that ran along the northern boundary, frozen solid now but reliable in summer. They pointed out the spot where their mother was buried, a simple wooden cross under a stand of pine trees. Martha stood before the grave for a moment, paying silent respect to the woman who'd loved these children first. "We should plant something here come spring," she said. "Something that blooms." What was her favorite flower? "Wild roses," May said. "The pink ones that grow by the creek. Then we'll transplant some here. Give her beauty to watch over." The girls nodded solemnly, and Martha could see them adding this to their mental list of things that made her trustworthy. Children kept such lists, she knew. They watched adults constantly, measuring words against actions, promises against follow-through. When they returned to the cabin, Caleb had breakfast waiting, more of his utilitarian beans and bread. Martha made a mental note to teach him proper porridge, maybe some eggs if the chickens would cooperate. But she ate without complaint, and the girls chattered about everything they'd shown her, their excitement infectious. After breakfast, Caleb disappeared to work on fence repairs he'd been putting off. Martha set the girls to washing dishes while she tackled the cabin properly. Not the surface cleaning Caleb had managed, but deep restoration, the kind that required moving furniture and scrubbing corners and opening windows to let fresh air chase out the stale ghosts of grief. The girls worked alongside her without complaint, their small hands surprisingly capable. May had a gift for organization, creating order from chaos with an efficiency that reminded Martha of herself. Lily was more creative, suggesting better arrangements, questioning why things had always been done a certain way if another way might work better. Your mother taught you well, Martha observed, watching them work. Mama said women had to be twice as capable as men just to be taken half as seriously. Lily replied. She said we should learn everything we could so nobody could ever tell us we weren't good enough. Martha's chest tightened. Your mother was absolutely right. By midday, the cabin had been transformed. Not into something different, Martha wasn't trying to erase Sarah's presence, but into something renewed. The windows gleamed, the floors shone, the hearth was scrubbed clean of years of ash buildup. Even the air seemed lighter. When Caleb came in for lunch, he stopped in the doorway and just stared. It looks like it used to, he said quietly. When Sarah was still. He didn't finish the sentence. The bones were always good, Martha said. They just needed attention. They ate simple food, bread and cheese, apples from the root cellar, and then Martha started the afternoon lessons. She had the girls read aloud from the single book in the house, an old almanac Caleb had used for years. Their reading was halting but determined, and she corrected gently, encouraging them to sound out unfamiliar words rather than giving up. Then she moved to writing, using a piece of slate Caleb had scrounged from somewhere. The girls formed their letters carefully, their faces scrunched in concentration. Martha watched them work and felt something unfurl in her chest, not quite happiness, but something related to it. Purpose, maybe. The satisfaction of being useful in a way that mattered. Tell me something, she said during a break. What do you want to be when you're grown? May didn't hesitate. A farmer. Like Papa, but better. I want to make things grow. Lily took longer to answer. I don't know yet. Maybe a teacher. Or someone who builds things. She looked up at Martha. Is it all right not to know? It's more than all right. You're 8 years old. You're supposed to be figuring things out, not having them all decided. The girls in town already know, Lily said. They're going to be wives and mothers. That's what everyone expects, and is that what you want? Lily's face screwed up in thought. Maybe someday. But not the way they mean it. Not just that. Then don't be just that, Martha said simply. Be whatever you need to be to feel whole. May leaned forward. Were you just a wife? I tried to be. It didn't work out the way I planned. Martha chose her words carefully. I loved my husband. Being his wife was important to me. But it wasn't all I was. I also kept bees, and grew medicinal herbs, and knew how to set a broken bone. Those things mattered too. Can you teach us those things? Lily asked, her eyes bright. The bees might have to wait. I don't have hives anymore. But the herbs and the bones? Yes. I can teach you those. The afternoon passed in a blur of lessons and conversation. The girls soaked up knowledge like drought-starved earth soaked up rain. Asking questions faster than Martha could answer them. They wanted to know everything. How plants worked, why the sky was blue, whether it was true that women couldn't do mathematics as well as men, why some people were cruel while others were kind. Martha answered honestly, never talking down to them, never pretending the world was simpler or fairer than it actually was. And the girls responded by trusting her with more questions, harder questions, the kind that revealed the sharp edges of their developing minds. When Caleb came in at sunset, he found all three of them huddled around the table, so absorbed in a geography lesson drawn in flour on the wooden surface that they didn't notice him at first. That's where we are, Martha was saying, pointing to a spot on her improvised map. And this is where I grew up, 200 miles east. And this, she drew a long line, is the route the railroad will take when it's finished, connecting us to the rest of the country. Will it change things? May asked. The railroad, everything changes eventually. The question is whether we change with it or get left behind. I want to ride a train someday, Lily announced. I want to see what's past the mountains. Then you'll need to save your money and plan your route, Martha said practically. Dreams are good, but plans are better. Caleb cleared his throat, and they all looked up. Sorry to interrupt the lesson, but someone needs to start dinner or we'll be eating raw turnips. My turn, Martha said, standing. Girls, copy down that map before we clean up the table. It'll be good practice for your hand control. She moved to the kitchen area, and Caleb followed, his movements careful. They've talked more today than they have in weeks, he said quietly. I've never seen them so alive. They're smart girls. They need mental exercise as much as physical. It's more than that. Caleb leaned against the wall, watching his daughters draw continents in flour with intense concentration. You talk to them like they matter. Like their thoughts are worth hearing. Because they are, I know that. But I never learned how to show it the way you do. He paused. Sarah was good at this part. Making them feel seen. I'm better with the practical things, keeping them fed and safe. But the rest of it. He trailed off, frustrated. Martha pulled out the soaked beans from the morning, started preparing them for the evening meal. You're doing better than you think. They're confident, curious, capable. That doesn't happen by accident, maybe. But watching you with them today, I realized how much they've been missing. How much I've failed to give them. Stop that. Martha's voice was sharp enough to make him look up. You're not failing them. You're doing the best you can with what you know. That's all any of us can do, and when my best isn't enough, then you find someone whose strengths cover your weaknesses. You ask for help. You admit you can't do everything alone. She met his eyes. That's not weakness, Caleb. That's wisdom. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Porter's going to hear about you being here. Probably already has. If anyone from town passed by today, I know, he'll come. He'll make it his business to interfere. I know that too, and you're not afraid. Martha thought about the platform, the chains, the 3 hours under the merciless sun. Thought about every time in her life someone had tried to make her smaller. Quieter, less. I'm terrified, she admitted. But I'm also tired of being afraid. So I'm choosing to be useful instead. Let Porter come. At least here I'll have people standing with me instead of a crowd throwing stones. Caleb's expression softened. Yes. You will. Dinner that night was the best meal the cabin had seen in months. Beans cooked properly with onions and salt pork, bread that was actually soft instead of hardtack, greens from the root cellar dressed with a little vinegar. The girls ate like they were afraid it might be their last good meal, and Caleb kept glancing at Martha like she performed some kind of miracle. After dinner, Martha taught them a simple song her mother had sung, nothing religious. Just an old folk tune about a traveler finding home. The girls picked it up quickly, their voices blending in the firelight, and when Caleb joined in with his rough baritone, something in the room shifted. The cabin stopped being a place where people survived and started being a place where people lived. Later, after the girls were in bed, Martha and Caleb sat together in the comfortable silence that had begun to develop between them. He was mending a harness, his hand steady and sure on the leather. She was going through the girls' clothing, marking what needed letting out, what needed patching, what needed to be replaced entirely. I need to tell you something, Caleb said suddenly. About why I really brought you here. Martha set down the dress she was examining. All right, it wasn't just about needing help with the girls. Or not only that. He kept his eyes on the harness. Porter's been making noise about children needing proper homes with proper families. He suggested more than once that the girls would be better off with a married couple. A complete family. He wants to take them from you. He wants control. And he'll use the girls to get it if he can. Caleb finally looked up. I thought if I had someone here, A woman, managing the household, teaching the girls, it would take away his excuse. Make us look more like a proper family, Martha absorbed this. So I'm here to make you look respectable, that's how it started in my head, yes. But that's not how it feels now. He set down the harness. Today, watching you with my daughters, seeing how you've already started fixing things I didn't even know were broken, I realized I was thinking about this all wrong. This isn't about appearances or strategy. It's about the fact that my girls need someone like you. Someone who sees them as whole people instead of problems to be solved or dolls to be dressed up. And what do you need, Caleb? The question hung between them. He took a long time answering. I need to remember how to do more than just survive. I need to remember that life can be more than just getting through the day without anyone dying or leaving or disappearing. His voice roughened. I need to stop being so afraid of everything that I forget to actually live. Martha understood that fear intimately, the way it could become a second skin, protective but suffocating. That's a hard thing to unlearn. Is it possible, though? To unlearn it? I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out myself. She picked up the dress again, focusing on the careful work of letting out a hem. But I think maybe it's easier with people around you who aren't afraid of the same things. Who can be strong when you're weak and vice versa, like a partnership, like a family, Martha corrected gently. They worked in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Warmer. Fuller. The kind that didn't need words to communicate understanding. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Winter was setting in properly now, and Martha knew that the months ahead would be hard, cold days and long nights and the constant work of keeping people alive and warm. But inside this cabin, with its clean floors and singing children and tentative hope, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like she belonged. And that feeling, fragile as it was worth defending. The feeling lasted exactly 3 weeks. Martha was in the barn on a gray afternoon in late November, teaching the girls how to properly milk the cow, when she heard the horses. Not the familiar sound of Caleb returning from checking the fence line, but multiple riders approaching with purpose. She felt it in her stomach first, that old instinct that said danger was coming and there was nowhere left to run. Girls, she said quietly, keeping her voice steady. Go to the house. Find your father. Lily's eyes went wide. But we're not finished, now. Something in Martha's tone made them move without further argument. They ran toward the cabin, their small figures dark against the pale sky, and Martha straightened slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. She walked to the barn entrance just as 5 riders came into view, Sheriff Porter at their head. He sat his horse like a man who'd never learned that authority and cruelty weren't the same thing. His deputies flanked him, young men mostly, the kind who enjoyed having power over people who couldn't fight back. Porter's eyes found Martha immediately, and his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Mrs. Hale, he said, not dismounting. Still alive, I see. That's surprising, is it? Martha kept her hands loose at her sides, her posture relaxed despite her racing heart. I'm harder to kill than most people expect, so it seems. Porter's gaze traveled over her slowly, deliberately insulting. Word reached me that you'd found employment with Caleb Ross. I thought I'd come see how a man manages with his reputation attached to someone like you. Someone like me. Martha repeated the words flatly. You mean someone you tried to destroy who refused to die quietly? I mean someone with a history of failure. Of inadequacy. He gestured vaguely at her body, visible moral weakness. Before Martha could respond, Caleb emerged from the cabin, the girls behind him. He moved with careful control, the kind that spoke of banked anger rather than calm. Porter, he said. You're on my land without invitation, official business. Porter finally dismounted, his deputies following suit. I've had reports of child neglect. Concerns about the welfare of your daughters. From who? Anonymous concerned citizens. Porter's smile widened. But given your current household arrangement, I felt obligated to investigate personally. Caleb's jaw tightened. My daughters are fine. Healthy, fed, educated. Better cared for than they've been in years, by a woman who was exiled from Coldwater for gross moral failings. Porter shook his head. That's not care, Ross. That's corruption. You're exposing innocent children to someone who's proven herself unfit for decent society. The only thing Martha Hale proved was that she could survive your cruelty, Caleb shot back. And that she's more competent and decent than half the people in your so-called decent society. Porter's expression hardened. Careful, Ross. Your position here is more precarious than you think. A widower, raising girls alone, now harboring a woman of questionable character. That's not a good look for someone who wants to keep custody of his children. The threat was explicit now, hanging in the cold air between them. Martha felt the twins press closer to their father's sides, their small hands gripping his jacket. She saw the fear in their faces, not of Porter exactly, but of separation, of losing the fragile family they'd just begun to rebuild. Something inside her shifted. Hardened. Became sharp enough to cut. She stepped forward, moving between Caleb and the sheriff with deliberate slowness. You want to question my character, she said. Fine. Let's be clear about what actually happened in Coldwater. My husband died of pneumonia that your precious concerned citizens could have prevented if anyone had bothered to help us get medicine. But they didn't, because we weren't important enough. Weren't connected enough. And when he died, you needed someone to blame, someone to punish for the town's collective failure. So you chose me. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I was convenient. You were punished for failing in your duties as a wife, Porter began. I was punished for existing in a body you didn't approve of, Martha cut him off. For taking up space. For not performing grief in a way that satisfied your need for spectacle. You put me in chains because you could. Not because you should. And now you're here, threatening to do the same thing to Caleb and his daughters, because you can't stand the idea of people building lives outside your control. Porter's face flushed. You're out of line. No, you are. Martha's voice didn't rise, but it cut like a blade. You rode onto this property with the explicit purpose of intimidation. You're using the welfare of children as an excuse to exercise power over people you don't like. That's not justice. That's tyranny dressed up in civic duty. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably. Martha noticed him, young, maybe 20, with eyes that hadn't quite learned to hide doubt. She focused on him. What's your name? She asked. He blinked. Ma'am, your name. What is it, Thomas? Thomas Warren. Thomas Warren, have you been inside that cabin? No, ma'am. Have you seen these children up close? Examined them for signs of neglect or abuse? Well, no, but then what exactly are you here investigating? What evidence of wrongdoing have you personally witnessed? Thomas opened his mouth, closed it again. He looked at Porter, who was staring at Martha with barely controlled fury. The children, Martha continued, turning to address all the deputies now, are healthy. Well-fed. Clean. Educated. Loved. They have a father who works himself to exhaustion to provide for them and a household that's functional and safe. What more does any child need? A proper mother, Porter snapped. Not some disgraced woman playing house. I'm not playing anything. Martha's voice went cold. I'm working. Earning my keep. Teaching these girls that women can be strong and capable and unapologetic about taking up space in the world. If that threatens you, Sheriff, that's your problem, not mine. The silence that followed was taut as a drawn bowstring. Porter's hand drifted toward his gun, not quite touching it but making the threat clear. Martha didn't move, didn't flinch, just held his gaze with the kind of steady calm that came from having already survived the worst thing she could imagine. Then May stepped forward. She was small, barely came up to Martha's waist, but she moved with her father's determined steadiness. She positioned herself between Martha and the sheriff, her chin raised, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Martha is good," she said, her voice high but clear. "She teaches us things. Important things. She makes our house feel like a home again." Lily joined her sister, the two of them forming a small but unmovable barrier. "If you try to take us away, we'll just run back," Lily announced. "We'll keep running back until you give up. Because this is where we belong." Porter stared at the twins, clearly not having anticipated resistance from children. He looked at Caleb. At Martha, at his increasingly uncomfortable deputies. The power dynamic he'd expected, authority confronting weakness, had been completely inverted. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the territorial court. They'll send someone to investigate properly." "Good," Caleb said. "Let them come. Let them see exactly how well my daughters are being cared for. I've got nothing to hide." Porter mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. "You're making a mistake, Ross. Aligning yourself with her will cost you everything." "Maybe," Caleb replied. "Or maybe I'm finally doing something right." The riders left in a cloud of dust and barely restrained violence. Martha watched them go, her heart hammering against her ribs, adrenaline making her hands shake. When they were finally out of sight, her legs went weak and she had to lean against the barn wall to stay upright. Caleb was beside her in an instant, his hand on her elbow. "Are you all right?" "No," Martha said honestly. "I'm terrified. I just antagonized a man with the power to destroy all of us." "You stood up to a bully," Caleb corrected. "You protected my daughters. That's not antagonism, that's courage." The girls crashed into Martha, wrapping their arms around her waist, their faces buried against her sides. She could feel them trembling, could feel her own trembling echoing back. She put her hands on their heads, holding them close, and felt something in her chest crack open. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have provoked him. I should have been more careful." "No," Lily said fiercely, her voice muffled against Martha's apron. "You were perfect. You didn't let him make you small." May pulled back just enough to look up at Martha's face. "Are they really going to try to take us away?" Martha glanced at Caleb, saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. But she also saw determination. Decision. The kind of resolve that came from finally choosing a side after years of fence-sitting. "They're going to try," Martha told the girls honestly. "But we're not going to let them succeed." "How?" May asked. "How do we stop them?" It was Caleb who answered. "We become exactly what we've been building, a real family. One that's strong enough to withstand scrutiny. Strong enough to prove that love matters more than convention." He was looking at Martha when he said it, and she understood what he was really asking. Not for pretense or performance, but for commitment. For the willingness to stand together against whatever was coming, to make official what had been growing between them organically. The girls picked up on it too, their eyes going wide. "Are you going to get married?" Lily asked, her voice caught between hope and caution. "I don't know," Martha said slowly. "That's something your father and I would need to discuss privately, but you're not saying no," May observed. "I'm not saying anything yet. Except that we need to go inside where it's warm and figure out our next steps." Martha gently disentangled herself from the girls. "You two go start the fire. Your father and I will be there in a minute." The twins exchanged a look, that wordless communication they'd perfected, then scampered toward the cabin, already whispering excitedly to each other. Martha and Caleb stood in the cold afternoon light, the space between them charged with everything they hadn't said. "I wasn't proposing," Caleb said quietly. "Not like that. Not in front of them without talking to you first." "I know, but I was thinking it." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "Hell, I've been thinking it for days now. Wondering if it would be the smart thing to do. The strategic thing, and is that what you want?" A strategic marriage, no. The word came out more forcefully than Martha expected. No, that's not what I want at all. I've had 4 years to think about what matters and what doesn't. And I'm done doing things just because they're smart or safe or what other people expect. Then what do you want? Caleb looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first day in the square when he'd seen past her chains to the woman underneath. I want my daughters to grow up knowing that strength comes in all forms. That women can take up space and be soft at the same time. That surviving isn't the same as living. He paused. I want to stop being afraid of everything. And I think maybe having you here, being part of this family, might help with that. Martha's throat tightened. That's a lot to put on one person, I know. And I know it's not fair to you. You came here for safety, not to take on my problems and fears. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. But somewhere in the last 3 weeks, this stopped being about solving my problems. It started being about something else entirely. What? Wanting. Not needing, wanting. Wanting to hear your voice in the morning. Wanting to watch you teach my daughters things I never could. Wanting to know what you think about everything from politics to pie recipes. He laughed, a rough sound. Is that terrifying to hear? Yes, Martha admitted. Because I want those things too. And wanting things has never worked out well for me, so what do we do? Martha thought about Porter's threat, about the territorial court, about all the ways this could fall apart. Then she thought about 3 weeks of laughter and learning, of feeling useful and wanted, of 2 little girls who'd chosen her without hesitation. We do what we've been doing. She said finally. We build something real. Not for show, not for Porter, not for anyone except ourselves. And if marriage is part of that, if it's something we both genuinely want, not just a strategic move, then we'll know when the time is right. Caleb nodded slowly. And in the meantime, we prepare. Because Porter wasn't bluffing. He's going to bring the territorial court down on us, and we need to be ready. They walked back to the cabin together, shoulders nearly touching, united in purpose if not yet in name. Inside, the girls had gotten the fire going and were already pulling out slates for their afternoon lessons, as if normalcy could be maintained through sheer force of will. That night, after the girls were in bed, Martha and Caleb sat at the table going through papers, deeds, records, anything that might help their case when the court investigators arrived. Caleb's handwriting was careful and precise as he documented everything: expenses, improvements to the property, the girls' educational progress. Do you think it'll be enough? He asked, honestly. I don't know. Courts tend to favor conventional arrangements. A married couple would look better than a widower and a woman with a scandalous past. Your past isn't scandalous. It's just inconvenient for people like Porter. Martha smiled despite herself. You have a generous way of looking at things. I have an honest way. Caleb set down his pen. Martha, if we did get married, not for show, but because we wanted to, would you consider it? Are you asking? I'm asking if it's even a possibility. If the idea of being married to me is something you could imagine without wanting to run in the opposite direction. Martha considered him in the lamplight, this good, solid man who'd offered her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to go. Who treated her daughters like people instead of property. Who never once asked her to be smaller or quieter or less. Yes, she said quietly. I could imagine it. I do imagine it, sometimes, when I'm not trying to protect myself from hoping for things. Caleb's expression softened. Then maybe we don't have to protect ourselves quite so much. Maybe we can just see where this goes, even if it's dangerous, especially then. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, reminding them that winter was far from over and harder days were coming. But inside, in the warm circle of lamplight, something fragile and precious was taking root. It wasn't safety. It wasn't certainty. But it was real, and that made it worth defending. the territorial investigator arrived on a morning when snow was threatening but hadn't yet fallen, the sky the color of old pewter and just as heavy. His name was William Graves, and unlike Porter, he had the kind of face that had learned not to announce its judgments before gathering evidence. He was maybe 50, with silver threading through his beard and eyes that took in everything without seeming to stare. Martha was kneading bread when she saw him riding up the path alone. Her hands stilled in the dough, and she felt that familiar tightening in her chest, fear mixed with defiance, the combination that had kept her alive through cold water and everything that came after. "He's here," she called to Caleb, who was teaching the girls their multiplication tables at the big table. Caleb stood immediately, his chair scraping against the floor. "Girls, continue your work. Martha and I will handle this." "We want to help," Lily protested. "You'll help most by showing him how well educated you are," Martha said, forcing calm into her voice. "Keep studying. We'll call you if we need you." She wiped the flour from her hands and stepped outside with Caleb. Graves was dismounting, moving with the careful precision of a man whose joints ached in cold weather. He nodded to them both, his expression neutral. "Mr. Ross." "Ma'am." "I'm William Graves, appointed by the Territorial Court to investigate claims regarding the welfare of minor children on this property. We've been expecting you," Caleb said. "You're welcome to examine anything you need to." "We have nothing to hide." Graves' eyebrows rose slightly, as if he wasn't used to such direct cooperation. "I appreciate that. May I start with a tour of the premises?" They showed him everything. The clean, warm cabin with its well-stocked pantry and organized living spaces. The barn where healthy animals lived in properly maintained stalls. The root cellar full of preserved food for the winter. The girls' bedroom with its neat beds and the slate where they practiced their letters. Graves took notes in a small leather journal, his pen scratching quietly. He asked questions. How long had Martha been here? What were her specific duties? How did the household finances work? What was the girls' daily schedule? Caleb answered honestly, and Martha added details when relevant. Neither of them trying to paint things prettier than they were. When Graves asked to speak with the girls alone, Martha felt her stomach drop. But Caleb squeezed her hand briefly, the first time he'd touched her with casual affection, and nodded, "Of course." They're inside. Graves spent 20 minutes with Lily and May while Martha and Caleb waited outside in the cold. Martha paced, her breath coming out in white clouds, while Caleb leaned against the barn wall with forced calm. What if they tell him something wrong? Martha worried. What if they say something that makes us look bad? They'll tell him the truth, Caleb said. That's all they can do. That's all any of us can do. When Graves finally emerged, his expression was unreadable. He walked over to where they stood and closed his journal with deliberate care. Your daughters are remarkably articulate, he said. And remarkably certain about what they want, which is? Caleb asked, his voice tight, to stay here. With both of you. Graves looked at Martha. They spoke very highly of you, Mrs. Hale. Said you've taught them more in a few weeks than they learned in the previous year. Said you make them feel capable. Martha's throat closed. She couldn't speak, Graves continued. They also said something interesting. They said you've never tried to replace their mother. That you've honored her memory while still giving them something they needed, a different kind of strength to learn from. That's true, Martha managed. Sarah Ross was their mother. I would never presume to take that place. Then what place do you presume to take? It was a loaded question, and they all knew it. Martha looked at Caleb, saw the same question reflected in his eyes. What were they to each other, really? Not quite employer and employee anymore. Not quite family. Something in between, undefined and therefore vulnerable. I'm someone who cares about them, Martha said carefully. Someone who wants to see them grow up strong and capable and unafraid. Whatever title that deserves, I'll accept. Graves studied her for a long moment. Then he said, Sheriff Porter claims you were exiled from Coldwater for moral failings. He's provided testimonies from several citizens regarding your character. I'm sure he has. He also claims that your presence here represents a corrupting influence on young girls who need proper feminine guidance. Martha felt anger flare hot in her chest, but she kept her voice level. Sheriff Porter punished me for failing to keep my husband alive through pneumonia. He put me in chains and humiliated me publicly because I didn't perform grief the way he expected. The moral failing wasn't mine, it was his. That's quite an accusation, it's quite the truth. You want to know my character? Ask me yourself. Don't rely on the words of people who wanted me destroyed. Graves' mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Fair enough. Mrs. Hale, do you believe you're a fit influence for young girls? I believe I'm an honest influence. I teach them that women can be strong without being hard. That taking up space isn't a sin. That surviving difficult things doesn't make you broken, it makes you experienced. Martha held his gaze. If that's corrupting, then yes, I'm guilty, and you, Mr. Ross. Graves turned to Caleb. What is Mrs. Hale's role in your household? Her official capacity. Caleb hesitated. Martha could see him weighing his words, trying to find the answer that would protect them all. But then his shoulders squared and he said simply, she's family. She's become family. That's rather unconventional, maybe. But my daughters are thriving in ways they haven't since their mother died. This household is functioning better than it has in years. If that's unconventional, I'll take it over conventional failure any day. Graves made another note. Sheriff Porter has suggested that a formal custody arrangement might be more appropriate. Placing the girls with a married couple in town who could provide a more traditional upbringing. No. The word came out of Caleb with such force that both Martha and Graves flinched. No. My daughters stay with me. They're my responsibility, my joy, my whole reason for living. Porter can suggest whatever he wants, it doesn't change the fact that I'm their father and they're happy here. Even if the court disagrees, even then. I'll fight this all the way to the territorial governor if I have to. Graves was quiet for a moment, looking between them. Then he said, there is one solution that would address most of the court's concerns about propriety. Martha knew what was coming before he said it. So did Caleb. Marriage, Graves continued. If you two were married, it would eliminate questions about the nature of the household arrangement. It would provide the girls with a legal mother figure. It would satisfy the conventions that, fair or not, matter to people in positions of authority, so we should get married to make things easier for the court. Martha's voice was sharp. Reduce ourselves to a transaction. I'm not saying you should, Graves replied mildly. I'm saying it's an option. What you do with that information is your business. He mounted his horse, settling his journal in his saddlebag. I'll file my report within the week. I'll note that the children are healthy, well-educated, and clearly happy. I'll note that the household is well-managed and the property well-maintained. Whether that's enough to satisfy the court. He shrugged. That's not entirely up to me. What are our chances? Caleb asked. Honestly, Graves looked at them both. At Caleb standing protective and tense, at Martha with her flour-dusted apron and defiant eyes. Honestly, better than most unconventional situations. But not guaranteed. Courts like certainty. They like situations that fit into neat categories. He tipped his hat. I'll do what I can. The rest is up to you. He rode away, leaving them standing in the cold morning air with a decision hanging between them like smoke. The girls came tumbling out of the cabin as soon as Graves was out of sight. What did he say? May demanded. Are we in trouble? No, Caleb assured them. You did wonderfully. He said you were remarkably articulate. What does that mean? Lily asked. It means you spoke well and made him understand how things really are, Martha explained, so we can stay together. May's voice was small, hopeful. we're going to do everything we can to make sure of it." Caleb promised. The girls went back inside, mollified for the moment, but Martha and Caleb remained outside. The snow had finally started falling, light flakes that melted as soon as they touched the ground. "We should talk," Martha said. "Yes." They walked toward the barn, seeking privacy. Inside, the animals shifted in their stalls, their warmth making the space comfortable despite the cold. Martha leaned against a support beam, suddenly exhausted. "Marriage," she said. "That's what he was suggesting, that's what Porter wants. Conventional. Respectable. Something he can't easily attack." Caleb's jaw was tight. "But I meant what I said before. I'm not interested in strategy anymore." "Neither am I. But I'm also not interested in seeing those girls ripped away from their father because we're too proud to do what needs to be done. Is that what this would be? Pride?" Martha looked at him in the dim light filtering through the barn slats. This man who'd offered her sanctuary, who'd defended her to Porter, who'd stood beside her while a court investigator examined their lives. This man whose daughters had chosen her, who'd started to feel like home in a way she'd never expected. "No," she said slowly. "It's not pride. It's fear. Fear of wanting something and having it turn out like everything else I've wanted, broken and painful and ultimately used against me." Caleb moved closer, his boots crunching on the straw-covered floor. "I can't promise it won't be broken or painful. Life has a way of being both those things regardless of what we do." He paused. "But I can promise you this, I will never use your trust against you. I will never ask you to be smaller or quieter or less than you are. And I will stand between you and anyone who tries to hurt you, including courts and sheriffs and the whole damn territory if necessary." Martha felt something in her chest crack open, that careful armor she'd built to survive cold water and everything before it. "That's a dangerous promise to make, all the best promises are," she laughed despite herself. A rough sound that was half sob. "You're supposed to be the practical one. The careful one who thinks things through. I've been careful for 4 years. It kept my daughters alive but not happy. It kept me functioning but not living." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. "I'm done being careful. I want to be happy instead. And somehow, impossibly, you make me think that might be possible. Caleb, I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm not demanding an answer or trying to pressure you." His thumb moved across her knuckles, gentle. "But I need you to know, if we got married, it wouldn't be strategy. It would be because I want you here. Because my daughters need you. Because somewhere in the last month I've started imagining a future that includes you, and I can't imagine one that doesn't anymore." Martha looked down at their joined hands. Hers were larger than most women's, broad-palmed and capable, the hands Porter had called evidence of excess. But Caleb held them like they were something precious. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think. Time to be sure this is what I want and not just what I'm settling for because I'm afraid. Take all the time you need." He squeezed her hand once, then released it. "But know this, whatever you decide, you have a place here. Marriage or not. You're part of this family. The girls have already decided that. So have I." They walked back to the cabin together, and Martha spent the rest of the day in a strange fog, going through the motions of cooking and teaching while her mind spun in circles. The girls noticed something was different but didn't push, sensing that the adults were working through something important. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Martha stood at her window watching snow fall in earnest now, covering the property in white. She thought about Richard, about the marriage she'd had before, built on affection and convention, functional but never quite fulfilling. She thought about the years since his death. The loneliness and humiliation and desperate survival, and then she thought about the last month. About teaching eager students and restoring a dying garden. About feeling useful and wanted. About two little girls who'd stood between her and danger without hesitation. About a man who looked at her body and saw strength instead of failing. The next morning, she found Caleb already up, feeding the fire. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression, hope mixed with careful neutrality, made her decision solidify. Yes, she said simply. Caleb blinked. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Not because the court wants it or Porter demands it, but because I want to. Because I'm tired of surviving and ready to try living. Because your daughters deserve someone who chooses them on purpose. She moved closer. Because you make me believe that maybe broken things can be repaired if you're willing to do the work. Caleb stood slowly, his eyes locked on hers. You're sure as I can be about anything. Which isn't completely sure, but it's sure enough. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. It was the first time he'd held her, and Martha was surprised by how natural it felt, how her body fit against his despite all the ways she'd been told she was too much, too large, too present. He held her like she was exactly right. We'll do it properly, he murmured against her hair. With the girls there. Make it something real, not just paperwork. I'd like that. They stood there in the pre-dawn quiet, holding each other, and Martha felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just safety, though there was that. Not just relief, though there was that too. But actual, genuine hope that the future might be better than the past. When the girls woke and heard the news, they shrieked with joy and peppered them both with questions about when and where and could they have new dresses and could they help plan everything. Martha laughed and answered as best she could, watching Caleb's face transform with his daughter's happiness. They were married 2 weeks later by a traveling minister who asked no questions and cared only about the fee. The ceremony was simple, held in the cabin with the girls as witnesses. Martha wore her best dress, still black for mourning, but clean and carefully mended. Caleb wore his Sunday clothes and looked at her like she was something miraculous. When the minister pronounced them married and Caleb kissed her, brief and chaste but full of promise, the girls cheered. And Martha felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, because life never offered that. But commitment. Choice. The deliberate decision to build something real out of necessity and want and fragile, growing love. A week after the wedding, Graves' report arrived. He'd ruled in their favor, noting that the children were thriving and the household was stable and well managed. Porter's complaint was dismissed, and with it, the immediate threat to their family, but Martha knew it wasn't really over. Men like Porter didn't give up just because they lost one battle. They'd be watching, waiting for mistakes, ready to strike if the Ross family showed any weakness, so Martha decided they wouldn't show weakness. They'd show strength, the kind that came from honest work and genuine love and refusing to be ashamed of existing. Spring came eventually, as it always did. Martha and the girls brought the garden back to life, planting companion crops the way Sarah had taught them through stories the twins remembered. The wild roses they'd transplanted to Sarah's grave bloomed pink and fragrant. And when they visited together, Martha felt no jealousy of the woman who'd come before her. Only gratitude that Sarah had loved these children first and taught them what love looked like. Caleb started smiling more, the deep lines around his eyes softening. The cabin filled with laughter and debates and the comfortable noise of people who'd stopped just surviving and started actually living. And Martha learned that she could take up space without apology. Could be soft and strong simultaneously. Could survive cruelty and still choose tenderness. Could be chosen, deliberately and completely, by a family that saw her exactly as she was and wanted her anyway. One evening in late spring, they sat together on the porch watching the girls chase fireflies in the twilight. Caleb reached for Martha's hand, and she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For standing. For refusing to break. For teaching my daughters, for teaching all of us, what real strength looks like." Martha leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away," In the yard, the girls shrieked with laughter, their hands full of captured light. And Martha realized that this was what redemption looked like, not grand gestures or dramatic reversals, but quiet moments of chosen joy. Days built on honest work and nights full of tentative intimacy. A family assembled from broken pieces, held together not by obligation but by deliberate, revolutionary love. She had been dragged into a town square and stripped of everything but her name. But she'd walked out of that square with her dignity intact, had built a life from almost nothing, had found people worth fighting for and who fought for her in return. The story wasn't about being saved. It never had been. It was about refusing to disappear. About surviving with intention instead of shame. About teaching the next generation that different wasn't dangerous, it was powerful. And as the fireflies danced and the girls laughed and Caleb's hand held hers steady, Martha understood that she'd done more than survive, she'd won.